Hey folks, David Stewart here. Let's talk a little bit about analysis, specifically 5 things that writers tend to miss when they are analyzing fiction. As you may know or may not know, I usually recommend that writers do a lot of reading, and there's a few reasons for this. The first one is it's enjoyable, so it's something that is fun to do on its own, but it will also give you techniques that you can then use as a writer to produce works of good quality. But it is only going to give you those techniques if you are able to pay attention to the techniques that are actually being used in the work, and this is what writers often miss. Part of this has to do with focus on certain things in genres that if you're a reader of, say, fantasy genre readers tend to focus and think about things in the book that aren't really important to constructing the book. But a lot of writers come from, say, like a literature analysis background, like they have a literature degree. And in the academic focus on literature, you really tend to look at things that aren't actually important when it comes to writing a good book. So you tend to focus on things like the themes that are in the book, some kind of allegory with the story, embedded messages. How the prose is constructed is a favorite topic, I think, in literature classes. And in genres like fantasy, if you're a fantasy reader, you tend to focus on things like world building, like what the map looks like, what the magic system is looking like, what kind of monetary system did they use in this make-believe world. But the truth is, none of those things are really going to help you produce a good book that people are going to like. You tend to focus on things that they're not unimportant. It's not unimportant to know the historical context of an important piece of work, but it's not that important for knowing how to write a book yourself. So here's 5 things that you should focus on when you're analyzing that a lot of writers miss. Number 1 is the story events. That is mainly the plot. And I'm talking about specifically what events comprise the plot. Where they are in the story, what's happening, what's the impact of those events, how far apart are they, how many pages apart are they, how many small events are there to make up a big event, are those events predictable, what kind of emotional impact do those events have on you, and what kind of impact do they have on the story? Do they change the trajectory of the story, and do they change plot goals? So focusing on story events is a big one. That's one that should be one of your main concerns because it's going to be the big structure of a book that's going to really determine how the book flows with the reader and whether the reader wants to put it down or wants to keep going to the end to figure out what happens. Number 2 is dialogue. That's how characters talk to each other. Readers tend to get very attached to characters based on their dialogue and their interactions with each other. So if you're reading a good book, you should really pay attention to how the dialogue is constructed. Is it very realistic dialogue? Is it a little bit more elevated with speech? And a lot of mistakes new writers tend to make is they like to make their dialogue very natural, like they're actually hearing somebody talk, when it really needs to be a little bit more filtered than that. So pay attention to the way your favorite books that you want to emulate in particular are using dialogue. How does that dialogue show you what's important about the character? How is the character becoming likable or unlikable through the dialogue? That's something definitely to pay attention to. And also just some technical things about how the dialogue is structured around with prose as well. Number 3 is character action. While dialogue will make readers get attached to characters, actions are what's going to make a reader love the characters. This is different from story events. This is the things the characters do that they act on. A protagonist should be an active character in general, and the way that character is active, what kind of initiative they take or how conniving they are, has a big impact on how we perceive that character. That's something that you really ought to pay attention to. Number 4 is the pacing. Pacing is really important, and a lot of writers miss exactly what makes a good book well-paced. And what really makes a book well-paced is actually not how much prose there is. A lot of times you focus on, there's a whole lot of prose passages that's going to slow the pacing down. But it actually has to do with the importance of what's actually going on in a scene, whether there's tension in the scene, whether there's something that we really want to know, something happens in that scene. There's an outcome we want to happen in a given scene. That's going to make it feel like the pacing is tight. So if you have a lot of moments of tension, moving towards resolution and then immediately moving on towards another tense moment, it's going to feel very well paced. But that's something you got to pay attention to in your good books. A really comfy read actually tends to have slower pacing. There's not that much tension, but something that's like a thriller needs to have that pacing be really tight. So pay attention to how your favorite books actually manage this. You should be asking in a scene, what's important about this scene? Because that's really going to help you understand how the pacing, the spacing of those plot events is really going on. And number 5 is the stakes. What is important? What's the main plot goal? What's at stake? What is going to be lost and what is going to be gained? This is something that a lot of, say, literature classes tend to not focus on. Like, what is so important about this plot that the characters care about it? You should be asking that question to yourself as you read those books. Why do these characters care about the outcome? Because the truth is, most readers are not interested in reading really very highly personal fiction, not because like they think that the story doesn't matter to them at all, but it feels like it doesn't because there's not a lot at stake. You haven't set up the story in a way that makes the reader feel like something matters about the outcome. So ask yourself what matters, and when you go to transfer that into your own books, how can I make sure that the stakes are high enough that the reader feels like what all these characters are doing is really going to matter? So those are the 5 tips. Let me know what you think about them down below. How do you like to approach analysis of books? I do a lot of book analysis on this channel. It's something I really enjoy. And I also get a lot from the way other people think about books too, because I experience a book one way, someone else says, you know, I really like the way this book did this. And it's worth paying attention as well to what other people think about a book and what they think actually mattered and what they think was done well in a book too. So thanks so much, and I'll see you guys next time. Oh yeah, don't forget to subscribe to my list, dbspress.com/list. I have a new book on creativity coming out in March. It's called Keys to Prolific Creativity, and you should check it out. I will have more info on that with my mailing list. So I will see you guys next time.